user-defined function, or we say function. The reason why we use the word user-defined is because we are the one to create these functions. A function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. That is, it brings out output when it is called. Functions are created to perform a particular task. Let's create a function. You use the keyword def, followed by the name of the function. It can be any name. Then you put a full column and execute a block of code. So this function will only be useful if I call the function. What is the name of this function? Is called function name. So when I call it, then it executes the code inside it. Don't forget, if you want to learn Python 101, data science, data analysis, web development, and lots more, kindly chart the numbers above. So today we want to look at function. A function is used to perform a particular task, and a function is also a reusable code, a code you can use any number of times of your choice. We have used functions several times since the beginning of this course. For example, let's say we have a list of items like names, Ola, Ade, and let's say Tunde. Now I can get the length of these items or this list by saying len. This length is a function and can be used multiple times in my program. So length of what? Of lists. So this is a function that's been defined by Python. So now I can define my own function and call my own function anytime I like. So let's look at how to define a function. We use the def keyword to define a function. Def greeting, you put a bracket, and after the bracket you put a full column. Now if I call the function greeting, what should be executed? Then you write the code. I want a message to display on the screen called welcome back. So anytime I call the greeting, then the message welcome back will be printed. How do I call this function greeting? Then outside the function, I can call the function by its name, which is greeting. So let's run this code. Can you see welcome back is printed? If I want to reuse this function, I can also reuse it. Call it again. It will print welcome back. That is the benefit of function. Now the next thing we want to talk about is a function with one parameter. What is the meaning of a parameter? Let's try to define a function called greeting2. Open a bracket. Anytime I call the function greeting2, I want to pass a value called parameter. And that parameter is name. You can give it anything, any name of your choice. You can say student name, student underscore name. So this is a function with one parameter. So you put a full column. Then in my code, I want to use that particular parameter. So you can just say print f string, or just say print welcome back. Then I can use that parameter anywhere I like. It's just like a variable. So I can just say welcome back, the variable name. So anytime I call this function greeting2, is expecting, can you see greeting2 name is expecting a parameter. And when you call the function and you're about to put the parameter, that parameter is now called an argument. So it expects one argument, which is a string. I can put any name there. I can put Ola. So let's run. It will say welcome back Ola. If you put Ade, welcome back Ade, and any name of your choice. Okay, let's write a simple function to determine if a number is even or odd. So say def determine even or odd. Now, for me to determine if a number is even or odd, it means I need that number. So that number can be my parameter. So you can just say number. Then I want to check that number. So that will go inside my function. So if the number you supplied when you call the function, if the number modulus 2 equals 0, this means modulus always returns remainder. So if I say number modulus 2, it means after dividing this, what is the remainder? So if the remainder is 2, is 0, then print even. Else, that means if the remainder is not 0, print odd. Now let me now call the function. So I can come down here and call determine even or odd. So it says I should supply an argument. So when you call the function, the value supplied is the argument. But when you are defining, the value you supplied is called the parameter. So the parameter has changed to argument here because I'm calling it now. So let's say 5. Let me determine if this 5 is even or odd. You can say it says odd. Let me determine 10. 10 is supposed to be even. Let me determine 100. 100 is supposed to be even. Now, we can have a function with 2 or more parameters. Let's say, for example, we want to define a function to add 2 or 3 numbers. Let me just say function add. The first number can be num1 or x, or num2 or y, any name of your choice. So we have 2 parameters here. So what do I want to do to the 2 parameters when they are supplied? That's the logic now. So I want to declare a variable called addition and add the 2 numbers supplied, which are num1 plus num2. Add the 2 of them and store them in addition, and then print. I want to say the sum of, what is the first number? Num1 that I supplied. I can put a curly brace to get that, num1, and num2 is then a placeholder for addition. So when I call this function, 2 arguments are now required. So let me call the function add. So it says num1, num2. So let me say that the first num is 10 and the second one is 23. So let's run. Can you see the sum of 10 and 23 is 33? Let me reuse the code and add other 2 numbers. Let me say 12 and 90. Let's run again. Can you see the sum of 12 and 90 is 102? So in the next class, we are going to look at functions with parameters. Sorry, function with return keyword. Now we want to look at function with return keyword. Let's define a function called add. Now this function wants to add two numbers. That means we need two parameters. Let's say num1, num2. We put a full column after the bracket. Now we can declare a variable to store the addition of num1 and num2. So sum equals num1 plus num2. So now if I like, I can say print sum. So anytime I call the function add, what is it going to do? It will request for num1, which is, let's say, 2, then comma 3. So it will print the addition of 2 comma 3 because I've said it in the function code that I should print the sum. So let's run this. Can you see it prints 5? But in most cases, I do not want to print. I want to return the value to be printed, which is sum. So if I say return sum, so let's try to run this function again. Can you see nothing is outputted because in the definition of the function add, I did not put anything like print. I only return the value to be printed, which is sum. So now, how do I get the output? Now, if I call the function add, it expects two parameters or two arguments here, 2, 3. It can be any number. You can put 10, 3. So it will return the sum. It can say that's a function of the return keyword. It will return sum without printing. So when it returns sum, I can store the sum inside a variable. I can just say result. So what am I doing here? When I call that function add, this will return sum. Check here, return sum, which is addition of num1 and num2. So the addition of num1 and num2 will be returned here and stored inside result. So if I like, I can print result. Can you see? The result is 13. That is the function of return keyword. Now we can have multiple return value. Let's try to write a simple program called def sum and average. The sum of average wants to get the sum of two numbers and get the average of two numbers. Let's call the two numbers x, y. It can be num1, num2, just anything you like. Now I can just say add to get the addition or to get the sum, x plus y. Now I want to get the average. So average, I can say x plus y divided by 2. So I want to return, anytime I call the function sum and average, I want to return the addition, that's the sum. I also want to return the average. So I can say return add, then average. So when let me call this function, sum and average. It expects two value. Let's say 5, 9. So this will return 14. But don't forget, I've told it that I should return the add. So it will return x plus y, which is what? Which is 14. And it will also return average because it has calculated the average here. So it's returning the sum, the average. So if it returns the sum, average, if I run the program now, you see no output. So I have to store the output in a variable. Let me say, let me just call it result. So I can now print result, or I can say f string, the sum and average are, just put the result here. So it will return the sum comma the average. Let's run. So you can see the sum and average are 14 comma 7.0. So can you see it? The sum and average are 14 comma 17.0. So that is the explanation of using two or returning two values. Now we can also return true or false. We can return true or false. Let's try to write a function to determine if a number is positive or negative. So let's say def, let's say is positive. That's the name of my function, is positive. Now I want to check a number. That means that particular function will take a parameter. Let me call it number. So if number is greater than 0, then it should return true. Can you see this? It should return true. Either. So else return false. So if you call this function now, let's say it's positive. So it's expecting an argument, let's say 23. So this will not print anything to the screen. It's only going to return either true or false. So 23 is positive, so it's going to return true. It will not display. So for it to display, I have to store this true or false in a variable. Let me call it result. So I can now print result. So print result. So let's print. So true. Okay, let's have another number. Let's have -4. Can you see it says false? The number is not positive, so it's going to be false. So we need to stop here for now. Don't forget, a function with a return keyword will not display an output until you store the output in a variable, then you can print. So thank you. Now let's look at positional argument and keyword argument. Positional argument, they are passed to a function in the order in which they are defined. They maintain their position. Look at the keyword, positional argument. They maintain their position. We will understand this better. Let's write a simple function. So def, let's say student details, and then we need the ID of that student and the age of that student. Let's say we want to determine if age is greater than 40 and an ID in, probably I have a list of ID, there is square bracket 1, 2, 10, 5 and 6. So if this condition is true, then I want to return qualified. So you have to quote this because this is not a variable. This is a string. Qualified. Had it been I stored qualified inside a variable, then I can say return the variable name. But now qualified is not stored in any variable. So it's going to be returned as a string, return qualified. Else means if this condition is not true, then you return you code not qualified. So if I call this function, I'm expecting the output to be qualified or not qualified. Now let's call the function. Now let's call it student details. Can you see it's expecting ID, comma, age? Now, if the ID is, let's say 2, comma, and the age is 50, definitely the person is qualified. So this is what we call positional argument. Everybody maintain their position. The ID is position 1, is the first position, while the age is the second position. So here, if you put 2 as second position and 50 as first position, you will not get the right output. So you must put the ID as a first position, because here ID is defined as the first parameter, and age as the second position because age is defined as the what? Second parameter. So they maintain their position. That's what we call positional argument. Don't forget, this should be stored in a variable, because in our program, nothing like print. So I can say check underscore student. So we can now print check. So print check underscore student. So let's print. Wow, it's qualified. Let's change this value to an ID that does not exist. Let's say ID 13. So it's going to return not qualified. Now let's go to keyword argument. They are passed to a function by explicitly naming the parameters and providing its values or their values. So let's try to demonstrate this. Now let's write a function called def student. Let's say student check, just like the first one. It requires ID and age of the student. So let's write the same code if age greater than 40 and ID in, let's still use the same thing we used there. Let's just copy. Let's copy this, either in this. So we want to return qualified, then else return not qualified. So let's call the function for you to understand what a keyword argument is. Let's say student check. It requires 2 parameters to argument, ID and age. So I can say ID, that is the keyword now. ID is what? Let's say 2, comma. I will also indicate the second keyword, that's age equals, let's say 50. Let's store the result inside check student, which is equals to this. So let's print check student. Let's look at the result. You can see it says qualified. It says what? Qualified. So now, what if I decide to change this position? That means it's no more a positional argument. Let me say ID is supposed to be the first argument here. So let me say age. Let's say age is 50, comma. Then the ID is, let's still have an ID in our list, ID 1. Can you see I've changed the position now? So using the keyword, so which means it's no more a positional argument because their positions are not maintained. I am now using the keyword to identify each argument or parameter. So we can print, you can see it's still right, qualified. So that is that about positional argument and keyword argument. Okay, now we want to look at default argument. If the caller of the function doesn't provide a value for a parameter, the default value is used. You will understand this better by the time we define a function. So define a function called greet. Now what if the function is called and you want the greeting to go to somebody? That means you know the name of that person. So say name. This is what we know. So let's greet that person. So say print hello. You can just put a comma instead of f string. Hello name. So anytime I call this function, you are required to put a name when you call the function. So, but sometimes you want the function to be called, and if the name is not supplied, you want a default name to be used. You want a particular name to be used if the name is not supplied. So you have to give it that particular name in case the name is not supplied. Let's call it guest. So let's call the function now called greet. Greet is expecting a string. Can you see it puts a default string equals guest? So let me put a string owl. This owl means the argument is supplied, so this is not considered. The guest is only considered when nothing is supplied. So because the guest is the default value, default means if anything does not happen, do that. So let's run our program. So it says hello owl. What if I don't put anything? So the default value, which is guest, will be used. Can you see? Hello guest. Second example, let's write a function to find the circumference of a circle. Circumference. I need radius and I want the user to supply pi, but pi has a default value. So in case pi is not supplied, I want the value to be 3.142. Then you put a column. So we can return, I don't want to print, I want to return the answer. So I'll print the answer later. So 2 multiplied by the radius that the user will supply, then multiplied by pi. So let's call this function. Let's call it circumference. It expects two values. Can you see? Radius and pi. What's the radius? Let's say 3, comma. You can see pi. It says float equals to 3.142. It means if I don't supply the pi, it will use 3.142 as a default value. So I can just say 3.142. Okay. We can store the return value. We can store it in, let's say, answer. Then I can print the answer. So we have print answer. Let's try to look at this. Can you see the answer is 18.852. Now let me do without supplying a pi. Can you see? Two parameters are defined here, but I supplied one. I made the pi to have a default value in case I do not supply any value. So it's going to use 3.142. That's what we call default argument. So let's print. Can you see the same answer is still 18.852? Okay, now we want to look at args, which means variable length argument. What do we mean by variable length argument? It means the parameters or the arguments you pass into the function can be of any length. Let's look at this function. Let's call it def add. I want to add any number or any length of numbers. So, for example, I want to be able to add 2, 3. I want to be able to add 2, 3, 5, 6. That's any length. That's why we call it variable length. Either so, instead of saying num1, num2, if I say num1, num2, this will only add 2 numbers. What if I want to add 3 numbers? That would be another problem. So why can't I use args? So star args. This will allow me to add any length of numbers. So put a full column. So we'll say return. Now, what do you want to do to the number supplied as arguments in the add function? I want to what? I want to sum all of them. So I can bring the sum function from Python. So I'll say sum the args. So it's returning the sum of any number of arguments I entered in the add function. So let me call the add function now. So you can say add. Can you say args? I can say 2, 4, 10, 9. And I want to store this result because I used a return keyword. I'll store the result in, let's say, result. So I can print the result to the screen. Say print result. So let's print. Can you see it's 25? Okay, let me increase this further. Let's say 12, 3, 4. Still with the same add function. Can you see? So I can put any length of numbers or arguments in this particular function. That is what we call variable length argument. Okay, we want to look at global keyword. What does it mean? Global is used to access a global variable inside a function. You will understand it better now. Let's define counter to be 0. Let's assume we want to write a function to increase the counter. So we define def increase. And this counter is outside this particular function. So we want to write a function to be increasing the counter or decrease that counter, and that counter is not part of the function. So how do I have access to this counter? How do I say when I call the increase function, then say counter equals counter plus 1. You can see there is an error. What error? It says shadow name counter from outer scope. It's saying this outside the function. Unresolved reference counter. So the only way to have access to this global variable, that's variable available to everyone, so is to use the global keyword to access it. So I'll just say global counter. That means I'm referring to a counter that is global outside the function. So this counter now is available to me in my function. I can use it anyhow I like. So this is just to increment a counter. Let's write, so there's no return keyword. Once I call the function, it will just increase the counter. And if I like, I can print, I can return. So let me write another function to decrease counter. So def decrease. So I will need the global to have access to the global variable counter. Then counter equals counter -1. So don't forget the reason why I'm using the global. It means I want to have access to these counter outside the function. Now let's write a main program to use these two functions. Let's call the program def, let's call it main. Now I want to loop, always try to ask the user, do you want to increase, decrease, or exit? As many times as possible until the user says exit before I break out of the loop. So I need a while loop inside my function, while true. Now let's ask the user for an option he or she wants, maybe to increase, decrease. So we have to store that inside the variable option. Int, say input. Let's just say 1 increment. If the user presses 1, that's he wants to increment. If the user presses 2, he wants to decrement, and 3, he wants to exit. So now if option equals 1, we want to increase the counter. So this increase now, we do what? It's going to increase the counter. That's a function. So we want to print now the counter, the current value of the counter now. Say counter is, then the counter. Now elif option equals to, I want to decrease. Then after decreasing, I also want to print f string counter is counter. Now if the user enter any other thing like 3, else just break out of the loop. Now I can call this function direct by just saying def main. Let's try to call it. Let's say main call. So let's run this function. Can you see? Okay, we need to adjust something here. Let's give it an opportunity to enter something. Let's reload. Stop and run. It says what? It says increment, decrement, or exit. So if I put 1, counter is now 1. It has incremented counter, which is 0 from the initial stage. Don't forget, it's a global variable here. It's 0. Do you want to increment, decrement, or exit? Let me just say 1. 1 means increment. The counter is now 2. Increment, decrement, or exit. Let me say 1. The counter is now 3. Now let me decrement. That's 2. Let me choose 2. So the counter is now 2. Let me decrement again. The counter is now 1. Let me exit by pressing 3. Then I exit. Now, there is another way for me to call this function. Instead of calling the function, I can say if underscore name underscore equals, then you quote underscore main underscore. The meaning of this is that This is a conditional statement that allows you to define code that runs only when the file is executed as a script, not when it is imported. So just write this and put the function you defined under. So the same thing, let's run again. Can you see? It says increment, decrement, or exit. Let me increment. Let me say 1. So the counter is now 1. Let me increment again. The counter is now 2. Let me increment. The counter is now 3. Let me increment. Counter is now 4. Let me decrement. Counter is 3 back. So let me exit by pressing 3. Exit. Okay. Now we want to modify our GP calculator. We want to turn this aspect of if statement to a function such that I can use that function in any part of my program or another program. So that is the benefit of a function. So instead of having all this, can we call a function to say, for example, calculate underscore grade point, and this will be possible if we pass in the score. This function will take this score and determine its grade point, and after that we can store the result in grade underscore point. So you can see that this function does not exist, so we can come outside the program and write the function. So we can come up here, we should call the function calculate grade point, and it will take a parameter which is score. Now we're supposed to start with a def keyword because we are just defining the function. So after the bracket there will be a full column, then we start to work on the logic. So when the user supply the score, we want to determine if score is greater than 70 point, you see 70, we want to return 4.0. Can you see it? Elif score greater than 60, we want to return 3.0. Elif score is greater than 50, we want to return 2.0, else return 1.0. So now we can now call the calculate grade point in any part of our program. So we now call it here. So the score here is coming from the user, so and it's passed as an argument here. For example, if the user enters, let's say 75 is passed here. So this calculate grade point, we check, is this parameter greater than 70? Can you see the logic? Is the score greater than 70? If it's yes, it returns 4.0. So that this will return 4.0 if 70 is supplied as score from the user, and that 4.0 is stored in the grade point. And the grade point here is going to be used here times the credit hour. So as stored in total grade point. So that is the essence. We have written this program before. We are only trying to write the logic to define a function that will be used in our program. All right. Hello. We want to demonstrate our knowledge of function by developing a simple bank app. Let's look at our output. Our program says, welcome to simple bank app. Your current balance is 0. Do you want to deposit, withdraw, or exit? Enter amount to deposit. If I choose deposit, then it says $4,000 deposited. You can see after this, it goes again and say your current balance is this. Deposit, withdraw, or exit. I want to withdraw. It says enter amount to withdraw. And it says $1,400 withdrawn. This is to tell you that number one, we need a loop. Because you can see always returning current balance. And after the first operation, it will tell me to perform the same operation again, which is display current balance and ask for deposit, withdraw, or exit. So it's like there is a loop. So let's try with our loop. So say while true, it means the loop should continue until I break out of the loop. Print. So the first thing that should happen in the first loop is to print the current balance. So we say f string, your current balance is. Now we need a variable that stores our current balance. When the app starts, the current balance is going to be 0. Is until I start to deposit or withdraw that the balance changes. So I should put this balance outside this loop so that it can be accessed by any other code or function. So your current balance is balance. So we have achieved this first line inside the loop. So the next thing is it wants to ask me to deposit, withdraw, or exit, and take input as any of these three actions. So I need something to store the action. So let me just say action as a variable is input. I can just say deposit, withdraw, or exit. Now if action equals deposit, what do I want to do? I want to add something to the balance. So I have to take that amount I want to add to the balance from the user. So I can say amount. That amount is a number, probably a decimal number, so I have to convert the input to float. So I'll say enter amount to deposit. Now, so if the user enters the amount, I want to make my deposit, and that is just saying balance equals to balance plus deposit, but I don't want to write the logic here. I want to call a function to make the deposit. So I can just call the function, though I have not written the function. Let me just say make deposit Now this function should take a parameter amount. So it will make deposits. It will take the amount and add the amount to what? To the balance. That is what this function will do. So I'll write the function outside this loop. Okay. So elif action equals withdraw. What do I want to do? I want to take the amount from the user that you want to withdraw and convert it to float and take the input, enter amount to withdraw. Now I can write another function to make withdrawal. So the name of the function is, let me call the function here, make withdrawal, and it will take the amount from the user. So it will withdraw any amount entered here from the current balance. Don't worry, I'm still going to write all these functions. I'm just showing you different ways to write your program. So L if action equals exit. What do I want to do? I want to say thank you for coming, or thank you for banking with us, thank you for banking with us. So, and that will necessitate breaking out of the loop. Now, what if the user does not enter any of these three? That shows there's an invalid input. Print invalid input. Don't forget, this is a while loop. It will continue to loop until we break out of the loop. Let's assume that the deposit is executed. After the execution, it does not go through all these. It goes back to the while loop and say your current balance is balance, and asks again, deposit, withdraw, or exit. So it will continue to go through the loop if any of this action is done, except that if the user types exit, it breaks out of the loop. So that is the essence of a while loop. So the next thing is to write a function, which is a function to make deposit. So we come outside the loop. So let's say define the function make underscore deposit. Now this will take a parameter, which is amount. Don't forget, when we call this make deposit, we want to also take in an argument, which is the amount the user wants to deposit. So when you are defining the function, since when you call the function, you supplied an argument. So when you are defining the function, you must also supply the argument, which is called the parameter. So make deposit. What do I want to do? I want to say balance equals to balance plus the amount the user enters. Yeah, but there's a problem here. Unresolved reference balance. So where is balance? Balance is outside the function, but I want to be able to access this balance. You can see it's not within the function. So how do I have access to this balance? I have to do what? I have to make it a global variable by saying there's a global variable I need, which is balance. So it recognizes that there is a global variable that is balance, and it takes that global variable balance plus the amount the user enters when calling this function and return it as a new balance. So since it knows that this balance is a global variable, so the current balance here will change. So after depositing, I want to print, use f-string. You can just say $, then your curly brace amount. So if the user enters 25,000, you say 25,000 deposited. So let's define the function to make withdrawal. So make withdrawal. We also want to enter the amount to withdraw. Put a full column after the bracket. So don't forget, we still need the balance. So global balance. So balance equals balance minus amount. Then we'll print f string, bring your dollar sign, then your curly brace. So the curly brace will allow us to put in our variable, which is balance. So you can say if it is 2000, the user enters 2000 withdrawn. But there is another shortcut to write this. Don't forget, I've taught you in previous classes. You can just say balance plus equals amount. It's the same thing as writing this. So you can just remove this. The same thing here. Balance minus equals amount. So we have written, you can see there is no error here again. We have written the function for make deposit. So when we call make deposit, we are expecting something to be entered here, which is called the argument. So it comes from what the user enters as the deposit amount. So this will be added. So in the logic here, it says when we call the make deposit, it should add the amount to balance. So the balance changes and increases or decreases. So I think we have written our program. What is next is for us to run the program and check. Okay, I want to make a space between welcome to Simple Bank app and your current balance is 0. So let me have a new line inserted there. So new line before your current balance is 0. So let's rerun again. Can you see? Okay, so deposit, withdraw, exit. Let me try to put a full column here to make it readable. So I want to make deposit. Enter amount, let me enter 5,000. So $5,000 deposited. Your current balance is, so you can see that after executing this, it goes back to the start of the loop. Yes, and do this again. And ask the user deposit, withdraw. That's the while loop. It says you should continue to go through the loop until there's a break. So let me deposit again. Deposit. Don't forget, the current balance, which was initially 0, is now 5,000 because I deposited 5,000. So let me add 4,000. So 4,000 deposited. It says, it go back to the loop and say your current balance is 9,000. Deposit, withdraw, or exit. Let me say withdraw now. Let me just withdraw 1,000 or 3,000. See, your current balance is 6,000. Let me put something non-realistic, like let's say 60 to tell me invalid input. So let me exit now. Exit. So that is the end of our Simple Bank app program. Now, looking at this program, there is a bug in this program. Let's try to run this program. Let's make a deposit of, let's say, 5,000. And then now let's make a withdrawal. Okay, let's say withdraw, not withdraw, withdraw. So I'm making a withdrawal of an amount more than the balance. Let's say 7,000. You can see it says minus $2,000 withdrawn, and your current balance is minus 2,000. That does not make a sense. So what we want to achieve here is to make sure that we check if the amount you want to withdraw is more than the current balance, then it should say the amount cannot be more than the current balance. So let's remove this. If amount is more than the balance, print. Amount cannot be more than balance. Now else means the amount is not more than the balance, then we should execute the withdrawal. So let's rerun this program. So let's say we want to deposit let's deposit 7,000. Let's make a withdrawal. Okay, withdraw is withdraw. Let's withdraw 8,000, which is more than the, can you see? Amount cannot be more than balance. So it asks me to do the operation again. It go back to the loop. So let me withdraw something lesser, like 4,000. Okay, let me say I want to withdraw I want to withdraw 2,000. So it says 5,000 withdrawn. That means there is a bug again in this program. It's supposed to say 2,000 withdrawn. Okay, I think I've located it. Come and look at this. It's supposed to say amount instead of balance, amount withdrawn. So let's run the program again. So let's say we want to deposit, enter amount to deposit. We want to deposit 4,000. 4,000 deposited. We want to withdraw 3,000. Can you say 3,000 withdrawn? So we want to exit the program. So that is all about the bug in the program.